I've been married to Derek for 11 years. 11 years of mortgage payments and grocery runs and figuring out whose turn it was to call the plumber. We have 2 kids, Caleb, who's 9, and Maya, who just turned 6. We live in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, in a house we bought when I was pregnant with Caleb, and Derek had just gotten his first real promotion at the logistics company he works for. It was supposed to be the beginning of everything. And I guess it was, just not the everything either of us imagined. I need to start a little further back to explain why what happened last March didn't come out of nowhere, even though Derek acted like it did. For most of our marriage, I worked part-time as a dental hygienist while Derek climbed the ladder at his company. When Maya was born, we both agreed, together, over a lot of conversations, that I'd step back from work entirely for a few years. It made sense on paper. Derek was earning enough. Childcare costs were insane. Someone needed to be home. I didn't fight it because, honestly, I didn't hate the idea. I liked being present for my kids in a way my own mother never was. But somewhere in those years of being home, something shifted in how Derek saw me. I didn't notice it right away because it happened slowly, the way water damage does. You don't see the rot until you press on the wall and your finger goes straight through. He started making comments. Small ones at first. Things like, "It must be nice to not have to deal with work stress," said with a laugh, but not really a laugh. Or, "I just think you could contribute more, you know? Even if it's small." I remember the first time he mentioned money in a way that made me feel like a guest in my own house. We were talking about whether to redo the bathroom, and he said, "Well, I'm the one paying for it, so I think my opinion should count a little more here." I stared at him for a full 3 seconds, waiting for him to say he was joking. He didn't. I brought it up later that night after the kids were in bed. I said calmly that I didn't like how that felt. He apologized, but in that way where someone apologizes to end the conversation rather than because they actually understand what they did. "I'm sorry you felt that way. You know the one. Over the next 2 years, it got worse in the subtle, grinding sense. He'd make decisions without consulting me, and when I'd push back, he'd bring up money. Not always directly. Sometimes it was just the way he'd say, 'I work really hard for this family,' with this heavy emphasis on I. Like I was somewhere decorative. Like the hours I spent making sure our kids were fed and emotionally regulated and at their appointments and thriving at school were just hobbies I had. I went back to work part-time when Maya started kindergarten. I got a position at a dental office about 15 minutes from our house. Derek was supportive on the surface, told people at parties how great it was that I was getting back out there, but at home, nothing redistributed. I was still doing everything I'd always done, the pickups, the dinners, the laundry, the school forms, the mental load of absolutely everything, plus now I had a job. And Derek still came home and sat on the couch and asked what was for dinner, like I'd been there all day doing nothing. I tried talking to him about it multiple times. Different approaches. I tried calm and direct. I tried writing it in a message so he could read it and process it. I tried bringing it up in a moment when things were good between us so it didn't feel like an attack. Nothing landed. His response was always some version of "I do plenty," or "You're exaggerating," or "I don't know what you want from me." What I wanted was to feel like a partner. Like someone who lived in this house rather than managed it for someone else. We did a few sessions of couples counseling about 2 years ago. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Alcafor, was really good. She had this way of reflecting things back to Derek in a way that I think genuinely surprised him. I saw him shift in his chair a few times when she'd summarize what I was describing, because when she said it, it sounded like what it was. He made some changes for a while after that. He started doing bedtime with the kids more regularly. He asked me before making big purchases. I felt hopeful, but within 6 months we'd drifted back. Not because of some dramatic fight. Just because old patterns are comfortable and Derek is someone who defaults to comfort. The changes he'd made took effort, and at some point the effort stopped feeling necessary to him, I think. Things were fine enough. We weren't screaming at each other. The kids were happy. What was the problem? The problem was that I had started to feel very, very alone. I'm not someone who talks about my marriage to my friends. I have a close friend named Priya who I've known since college, and she knew something was off because she knows me, but I didn't pour details out to her. I kept thinking Derek and I would sort it out. That the next conversation would finally be the one that clicked. I kept giving it another few months. Last January, I started seeing my own therapist. Just for myself, not for the marriage. Her name is Jess, and she's in her 40s, and she has this no-nonsense warmth that I really needed. I started understanding some things about myself in those sessions. About how I'd learned to make myself small to avoid conflict. About how I'd been so focused on keeping the peace that I'd stopped advocating for myself in any real way. Jess didn't tell me what to do about my marriage, but she helped me get clear on what I actually needed. And the clearer I got, the more obvious it became that I hadn't been getting it for a long time. I had one final serious conversation with Derek in February. I sat him down on a Sunday afternoon while the kids were at my mother-in-law's. I told him I was struggling. I told him specifically what I needed to change. I wasn't emotional about it. I'd practiced it with Jess, which sounds strange but helped. I was just honest. I said I felt like a household employee more than a wife. I said I needed to feel like we were actual partners, or I didn't know how much longer I could do this. Derek listened. He said he heard me. He said he'd try. For about 3 weeks, things were marginally better. Then we had a disagreement about money. Specifically, I had signed Caleb up for a travel baseball league. It was $300 for the season, and I had cleared it with Derek in what I thought was a conversation. He claimed I had mentioned it, but he hadn't agreed to it. I said I distinctly remembered him saying it sounded fine. He said I was rewriting history. It escalated into a bigger fight about spending, which turned into a fight about how I handled the household budget, which turned into him saying in a voice that was very controlled and very cold, "I'm starting to wonder if this marriage is even working." I felt it in my chest when he said it. But not in the way he probably intended. He kept going. He said he felt like he was working himself into the ground and that he didn't feel appreciated. He said he wasn't sure what he was doing any of this for. He said, and I remember this part word for word because I've replayed it, "If you can't get on the same page as me, maybe we should just get divorced." He said it like it was a trump card. Like the threat of it would make me fold, apologize, recalibrate back into someone more agreeable. I could see it in his face. The expectation that I would get upset. Cry, maybe. Tell him no, we can work this out. I looked at him for a moment, and something that had been wound tight in me for years just went completely slack. I said, "Okay." He blinked. "What?" I said, "Okay. If that's what you want, I'll start the process." He stared at me. I could see him trying to recalibrate. He said something like, "I didn't mean right now, I just meant," I said, "Derek, you've said some version of this to me before. And every time you say it, I talk you down and we go back to normal and nothing changes. I don't want to do that anymore." I got up and I went into the bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed and I just breathed for a few minutes. I wasn't crying. I felt weirdly calm. Like when you've been dreading something for so long and it finally happens, and the dread just dissolves into this clean, clear air. Derek knocked and came in after about 10 minutes. He sat next to me. He said he didn't want a divorce, that he'd been frustrated and he hadn't meant it. He was softer than he'd been in a long time. I could see he was scared. I told him I believed that he hadn't fully meant it in the moment. But I said it wasn't really about that one comment. I said I had been unhappy for a long time and I had told him that and things had not changed and I was done waiting for them to. He asked what that meant. I said I wanted to talk to an attorney, just to understand my options. Not as a declaration, just as information. He did not take that well. He said I was overreacting, that I was blowing one fight out of proportion, that I always did this, made mountains out of molehills. Which honestly was a perfect example of the thing I was trying to describe to him. Even in the moment when I was telling him I was at my limit, he was telling me I was wrong about my own experience. I called an attorney named Sandra the following week. She came recommended by a woman in my dental office who'd been through a divorce a few years earlier. Sandra was practical and straightforward, and she laid everything out for me in a way I found steadying. Ohio is an equitable distribution state. We'd been married 11 years. I'd given up career progression to support the household. There were kids involved. She walked me through what I could reasonably expect, what the process looked like, what I'd need to document. I didn't make any decisions in that meeting, but I walked out of it feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Like I had footing. Like I wasn't just standing in someone else's house hoping they'd remember I lived there too. I told Derek I'd spoken to an attorney. He went very quiet. Then he asked if I was serious. I said yes. He asked if there was anything that would change my mind, and I said I didn't know. That was honest. I genuinely didn't know. What followed was about 3 weeks of the most disorienting time in my marriage. Derek was trying in a way he hadn't tried in years. He came home early. He made dinner twice. He took the kids to their Saturday activities without being asked. He was attentive and present, and it was like living with someone I'd missed for a long time. And part of me, a big part, responded to that. Because I didn't want to blow up my family. I loved Derek, in the way you love someone whose life has been wrapped up in yours for over a decade, whose breathing you recognize in the dark. I didn't want to lose that, but I kept going to therapy. And Jess kept asking me what I actually wanted, not what I was afraid of, not what was easiest. What I wanted. I had a hard time answering that for a while. The thing that finally clarified it for me wasn't a dramatic moment. It was small. It was a Tuesday night in March, about a month after everything had started. Derek and I had had a nice evening, actually. We'd eaten dinner together and put the kids to bed, and we were watching something on TV, and he made an offhand comment. I don't even remember exactly what it was. Something about how I'd scheduled something without checking with him first. Just a passing thing, not a fight. And I felt it. That little contraction. That reflex to apologize, to smooth it over, to take up less space, and I thought, I am still doing this, even now. Even after everything, I told Sandra I was ready to move forward. I want to be careful about how I tell this next part because I don't want it to sound like a gotcha moment. It wasn't satisfying in the way people might imagine. It was just sad mostly. Derek found out I'd formally started the process when the papers came. I had not hidden what I was doing, but I had not narrated every step to him either. When he understood what he was holding, he came to find me in the kitchen. He looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. He said, "You actually did this." I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought you were giving us a chance." I said I had given us many chances. That wasn't said with any heat. It was just true, and then he said it again. Not as a threat this time, more like a test, like he was still trying to find the version of this conversation where I backed down. He said, "You know what this means. If you sign those, that's it. We're done." I had a pen in my hand already. Truly, genuinely coincidental, I'd been paying bills at the kitchen table before he came in. I looked at him and I looked at the papers and I signed them before he'd finished the sentence. He went very still. I put the pen down. I said, "I know." He left the room. I heard the garage door open and his car pull out. He was gone for about 2 hours. When he came back, he didn't say anything that night. Neither did I. The divorce has been in process for about 5 months now. We're doing it as cooperatively as we can for the kids' sake. And genuinely, Derek has been better through this process than he was in the last few years of our marriage, which is its own kind of bittersweet. We have a mediator. We've agreed on a joint custody arrangement that I feel good about. Caleb knows something is changing. He's perceptive that way. Maya is still mostly in the dark in the way 6-year-olds can be. We're doing the work to get them through it as gently as possible. People keep asking me if I'm okay. My mother asks it every time we talk with this weight in her voice. Priya asks it more quietly, in a way that has more room in it. My answer to both of them is the same, and it's honest. I'm not happy exactly. I don't think this is happiness. It's more like being on solid ground after a long time of not being sure where you were stepping. There's grief in it. Of course there is. You don't spend 11 years with someone and walk away from that without grief. I cry about it not every day, but regularly. I miss the idea of us. I miss who Derek was when we were 29 and signing mortgage papers and thinking we had figured out all the important things. But I don't miss feeling invisible. I don't miss editing myself down before I even finished thinking a thought. I don't miss that particular silence in a house where everything looks fine from the outside. He threatened me with the end of our marriage more than once over the years, and every time I held the thing together because I was afraid of what falling apart would look like. Turns out it doesn't look like I thought. It looks like a Tuesday morning where I drop the kids off at school and drive to work with the windows down and feel, against all logic, something that is very close to okay. He didn't finish the sentence before I signed. I don't think that mattered to either of us, really. The sentence had already been finished. I'd just been the one to do it.